What's up, y'all? Let's do a quick little introduction and we'll get into this video. My name is Jacob Sermon. I play football at the University of Washington. I've always liked to create and build things, and during this quarantine time, I have a little time off. And so I thought I'd try to see if I could make a knife. And so it's a process. I don't know if it's the right way or the perfect way, but it's my way. And so I'll kind of walk you through a couple steps I took and see how we do this thing. Let's do it. Alright, y'all, so basically what we did here is we had a cutout of a wooden template, and I'm spraying paint over it. When I pull it off, you'll be able to see the outline of what I'm going to try to cut away, which will give us the kind of outline of the knife. Here we're using a angle grinder with a cutting disc. We're going to cut out the rough outline of the knife itself, and then shortly we're going to switch to a grinding disc. This will be used for the kind of contours and internal curves of the knife. This process probably takes about an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on how big the knife is and how thick the steel is. So, you didn't need to watch all of that, but here's kind of the rough outline of it. Behind the scenes here, we'll get on the belt grinder and kind of clean up some of those curves. Here we're using a center punch, which is going to punch the holes for the pins. When you're working with metal, you have to have pins that will help guide the drill bits into these holes. So now you see we have 4 holes there, and I'm drilling 2 extra holes. These are a little bit bigger than the pin holes. These will be to mount the knife on a jig I made that helps make a consistent bevel. Just for future reference, the bevel is the slanted part of the knife that comes down to the sharpness. Here's a Sharpie. I'm going to mark this down, so later I'm going to be able to scribe and mark that finds the exact center of the width of this knife. Here I use a tool. This is going to help me find the depth of the bevel, so when I grind I know where to stop. That way it doesn't get too tight and it's consistent on both sides. I use a drill bit that's the same width as the knife, and using the point of that I'll scratch a line down the center which has that width. Then I'll adjust this little jig I made, which changes the angle using that digital angle finder, and I'll attach the knife to this jig. And so when I use the sander part of it, it's now going to be able to make a consistent bevel angle on both sides of the knife. It's more accurate than if I did it freehand. This is the grinding process. This is the probably most meticulous and time-consuming part of the knife making process. You'll see I go back and forth a lot, dip it in water. 2 reasons for that. One, it's not too hot for my hands to, I won't get burned. And second, it won't warp or wreck the knife. And this is it. So this is the initial bevel. It looks pretty good. I like the way it turned out. Actually, that's one of my better bevels I made. Here I'm just kind of cleaning up some of the paint as we're getting it ready for heat treating. In hindsight, probably not the best idea to wear open-toe shoes here, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna get some charcoal and use a kind of a cheap hair dryer to oxygenate it, which makes it hotter. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna put the knife in and bring it up to a really, really hot temperature. And what this does is it makes the knife really, really brittle. So we'll get it in here and we're gonna actually take it out and we're gonna quench it in oil. And so this rapid change of temperature makes the knife really brittle. So if you were to drop it at this point, it would probably crack like an egg. And then we're gonna temper it in an oven. And what this does is it draws back that brittleness and makes it a really hard knife that's able to hold the edge and remain sharp. I do it at 400 degrees for about 2 hours for 2 cycles. Here's the micarta scales, which is another word for the handles. This is made out of resin, epoxy resin, and little bits of black and red t-shirts. The process was it was long. It was hard. It's a very creative process. You can do it many different ways. We're using a drum sander here to make sure that each side's flat and consistent. These are the spacers I made. Same fiberglass resin. I use construction paper with layers to create that. And I'm using an epoxy here to attach the scale, which is another word for the handle, to the spacer. And these spacers will go directly against the tang, which is the metal part of the handle on the knife. And you'll mount these on both sides using the epoxy as well as little pins you'll see me making. This is the product as we have right now in a rough cut. Now I'll hand saw some pins out. We need 4 of them. And from here I'll go to this sander and kind of sand on the tips to make it pointy. Helps push it in and out a little bit smoother. Here's a rough outline. Here's the pinholes with the pins inside of them. Now we'll use the pre-existing holes in the actual blade of the knife to drill through into the scales to make consistent holes. As I drill the holes, I'll replace the hole I just drilled with a pin to make sure that they're each lined up well. After some hand sanding behind the scenes, you kind of get rid of the grind lines you saw to make them vertical. The upper part of the scales is tough because you can't sand it once you've already epoxied it to the knife because you'll wreck the blade. This is the epoxy process. You have to work quick. This epoxy sets in about 5 minutes. So what I'll do there is I'll mix the two epoxies and I'll smear it on the scale side, and I'll actually add it to the tang, the metal part of the knife as well. And so these pins will slide through and the epoxy will set. Right here, I'll make sure I tap the pins through. I usually cut them a little bit longer than you might need, so there's excess on both sides. So I'm not worried about not having enough pin material to go through the entire knife as well as the scales. So now I'll clamp them up, make sure I wipe as much of the excess as I can. It makes the cleanup and shaping of the knife handle a little bit easier as I'm done. I'll let this sit for about 6 hours or so, and take these things off, and you can really start seeing the knife come together here. You take these off and you have the main shape of it, and now it becomes the shaping of the handle itself. So I'll cut off the excess pin material here and make sure it's flush with the knife, so that way when I want to shape the outside of it, it rests level on my workbench. Here I'll just tape up the knife blade. As we're working with the scales and the handle, we don't want to mess it up. The fiberglass epoxy is super poisonous, so make sure you use a mask if you're using it. This is a Dremel bit. This is a router bit, so what I'm doing here is I'm scribing a line that indicates the depth that I want to route to. So I'm using a hand router, which is great because it's quick, but also it's really easy to slip up and make a gouge too deep, so that line helps me guide exactly how deep I want that router to be. After that, I'll work to the hand. I'll grind out those levels, and then I'll use a high grit sandpaper to smooth it out. From here, I'll go incrementing levels and sand it all the way up to a glossy finish. It's my favorite part of the video right here. You can see that shine coming in. Now we'll move to a polishing disc. This red material is a lower grit. This primes it up for the next polishing disc. You'll see this white. This white is a high gloss finish. It'll produce a little bit of a glassy, shiny effect on the scales. You'll kind of see as we work it up and down. This really brings out the shine as well. We're going to do the same work with the blade itself. Get it shined up and ready for the secondary bevel. This secondary bevel is the sharp part of the knife that's actually going to do the cutting. We'll work it on the disc or the sander at first, and then we're going to move to a Japanese waterstone. This is 1000 grit right here. Working that bevel as consistently as we can. Then we'll flip it over and we'll do a 6000 grit Japanese waterstone, making that as sharp as we can. Then we'll move to a leather strop, as you see here. This removes any of the last final burrs and it makes it extremely sharp. And this is about as finished as you're going to get. It slides through paper easily, and it's pretty effective. I was pleased with the sharpness and how well the knife seemed to hold an edge. It cut pretty well. It's definitely usable. It worked with wood great. I think it might have cut wood even better than it did paper, slicing that really easily. And here we have the final form of the knife. A lot of effort and work put into this thing, but I'm pretty proud of the way it turned out. It's a good one. I hope you guys enjoyed. Appreciate y'all. Go Dogs.